shrill and strident song of a red javelin airplane overhead, the momentary blink of a purple shadow, it was over. She had lost. Bobby Stewart cut her gas, and the old GB airplane, man-killing airplane, gratefully settled back to cruising speed. It had been a bitter race. From Florida and Maine and Washington and California, the pick of the swift-flying sorority of winged womanhood had come to contest the title of speed, although very few of the men in the profession would even hint that there are extraordinarily good pilots among them. It might have been observed that no masculine eagle on the field had breathed during the whole of the contest. Men, at best, fly reasonably to win. Women fly to win alone, deft but driving hands on stick and throttle with no thought but for victory. A hard-fought fight, but she had lost. It had been one race too many for the ancient GB airplane. $5,000 gone. Oh, how could she ever tell Mike? The Department of Commerce inspector, named Pat Mullins, came around the stubby, shabby wing. He cleared his throat once or twice and looked embarrassed.
Swell race, Bobby. GB was never flown like that before. Gee, you had the old pump down in my boots one minute and kicking my tonsils the next.
Thanks, Pat.
But cheer up. Next year,
this old plane will be 7 years old. It ought to have a pension, Pat. We ought to put it on a pasture full of gas tanks and let it graze out in its last days in peace.
Ah.
Pat?
Don't take it so tough, Bobby. You fought a good battle, but honey, you can't beat horsepower.
Pat? Have you got $10?
10? Well, no, I haven't, but I got me a $20 bill, and you're welcome to that, Bobby. So you don't come all the way from California dead broke now, do you?
Not broke, Pat. I've got friends, and they run airports.
You mean you were counting on that $5,000 first place? Say, you must have needed it pretty bad. Did Mike know about it?
Well, no.
Hell of a father he is. Did you tell Hugh Conroy?
What difference would that make?
What difference?
Demanded Pat, to cover up the fact that he was shoving a 20 into her jacket.
Let that young pup come around me and I'll show him the difference. A swell, pretty little kid like you with more guts and brains. Conroy, huh? 8 years ago when I had the Southwest, I gave him his private license. Damned if I didn't. And he came pretty close to not passing, too. And now, just because he's tucked away all the cross-country records, he thinks he can stick his nose in the air and pass up.
That's not true. Hugh Conroy parks his crates at our port and gives us all the rent and help we need. And if Mike wasn't so sensitive about it,
Yeah, well, there's Mike again. I mean, look here, Bobby, that old warhorse isn't pushing you into him. Well, good God, Bobby, he is still mopping around, and is he still moping around about that confounded leg? See, Mike had his day, and one day's enough for any dog. He had a circus of his own, and all the fun and pay and sudden death that a man could want.
When you boys refused his flying license because of that leg last time, it pretty near broke his heart, Pat.
I suppose we ought to let every guy that flew fly, huh? I suppose he'd work the rudders with one foot and throttle it all down with his ears. If we pass him, he kills somebody. Secretary Yao.
I know you had to. But I just wish there had been some way to give him at least a solo license. Pat, if you could see the way he sits and stares out across the port all day, if you could watch his eyes light up when he hears a ship overhead, you'd pass him, leg or no leg. He wouldn't hurt anybody, Pat.
You and me went over this a dozen times, Bobby. And you shouldn't ask me such things. Look here, you can take anything I got. I mean, ask for anything you want for yourself. Bobby, you didn't want that $5,000 because of Mike, did you? Don't look at your toes, look at me. Is that why you hitchhiked this crate 1,500 miles? Is that why you gave me heart failure and almost met the angels winging up there today? Is that why you don't make a play for this damn fool Conroy the way you should? Look at me, Bobby.
Well, what if it is? It's breaking Mike's heart. I can't stand to see him that way, limping around, trying to grin the ghost of his old smile. If I had crushed and smashed myself up, what do you think my dad would have done? He'd spent his last cent and stolen the rest, that's what. You expect me to be different than my own dad?
I'm sorry. You think that young pup would get wise to himself? I mean, he's got money and he's got fame, and why the hell don't he do something? Wasn't he almost raised in your family? Didn't Mike teach him every trick in the book? Didn't I give him his first license? Next time I see Mr. Conroy, he's going to get a piece of my mind. He's going to, well, I'm going to let you come all the way out here. I mean, how can he let you come all the way out here and almost bust your neck with a damn GB? I shouldn't have passed it. I should have set down my foot.
Hugh is all right. I wouldn't trade on his name, Pat. And he's short on cash, too. You can't eat silver trophies, and planes won't run on wishes. Hugh has his own life to lead.
Pat read more into her last remark than she had intended. He scowled thoughtfully for a minute.
Last week I read in the Manhattan Keyhole about this movie star, Yvonne Maurice, seeing some handsome flyboy. I bet it was Conroy.
I wouldn't know. It really isn't any of my business. Thanks for the 20, Pat. I'll send it back to you when my Air Express comes in.
So long, Bobby. Next time I'm down at the bookstore, I'll send you a copy of How the Mounted Police Get Their Men. Nurse that motor, Bobby. It sounds like a cross between a boiler factory and a death rattle. And never mind the 20. You go buy yourself an evening gown or some perfume or something, and you knock him dead.
The trip back from the Middle West had taken 3 days due to a stuck valve which had been replaced by a flattered mechanic free of charge in Salt Lake City. And now, 2,000 feet under the wheels, the dried beige coastal plain stretched toward the hazy sea. The airport that is, politely so called, was a dusty square below and ahead, bounded by a highway, a power line, and rows of gaunt, clay-colored eucalyptus trees. Bobby Stewart was glad to be home. The adventure had ended. The result of her folly must be faced. The scramble to make the hangar rent cover the taxes would continue. The GB settled in on the runway with a grumble and a growl. Bobby gunned up to the hangar door and cut the gas. Mike, hobbling very fast and stabbing his cane at the ground, hurried out to meet her.
Hey, Bobby! How was your trip? What was your time between Denver and El Paso? Did that cylinder eye act up? See any new crates out there? How was Eileen? Did you meet anybody I know? Anybody say hello to me? I bet you're tired. Where did you stop last night? Was it a bumpy coming over the hump? I see the wind was 90 and more through the pass. Well, how did that old box kite run? Did that valve stick? Huh? My God, Bobby, it is so good to see you back here. This place was like a tomb, and a damned hot one at that. Haven't seen anybody but Hugh, and not much of him. He's teaching that Yvonne Maurice to stunt. You know. Well, for heaven's sakes, Bobby, get down from there. Come on, let's go. I'll get you some coffee. Gee, you look tired, Bobby. What's the matter with you? You look white as a altostratus cloud. Come on now, get down.
Through all this, Bobby was getting down, removing her helmet and so forth. Good old Mike looked happy. His gray eyes were aflame, and his sparse gray hair stood in every direction in the wind. In spite of his leg and his cane, he gave Bobby a hand, rolling the airplane into the hangar. He talked incessantly without waiting for answers. Mike pushed Bobby away from him and inspected her fondly and gloatingly. She was nowhere near as tall as he was, and he was far from being as handsome as she was beautiful. Mike thought Bobby had been to El Paso to see his sister Eileen, but then Mike had thought a lot of things which were not true. As they walked slowly toward the small cottage which stood at one end of the field, Mike asked about the thing which was of the most vital importance. He knew that his stiff knee could be made to work again. A famous doctor had told him that shortly after the last accident, but the money had barred it. Not a month before, Bobby had tried to snap him out of his gloom. Hoping that she could win the air race, she had sought to relieve his mind with a white lie. Bobby had said that a famous Eastern surgical clinic had told her that as the world owed Mike Stewart a great deal for what he had done, the clinic would at some future date complete the operation free of charge, and Mike would fly again.
You hear any more from that sawbone?
Bobby looked away to hide the fact that she winced. Her failure lay heavily in her heart.
No. No. But they have to study up and make arrangements, and the hospital is probably full of rush cases, and...
Sure, you know. But just you wait. When everything's all right, we'll kiss this chunk of parched ground goodbye and show these young squirts what it is to set records. I set a record once. Yep, 16 days, transcontinental. That was when I was 19, and the ships were made of cardboard and glue. I wrecked enough parts in smash-ups to build 3 planes.
Another plane was coming in, a long, sleek ship, all shiny and glistening in the red light of the fading sun. The wheels were let down to caress the runway. The twin engines chuckled softly about their power and speed, and it taxied toward the hangar.
My golly. Who owns that snorting monster? Don't tell me we get to start collecting rent on all that, Mike.
You bet. I'm some good around here after all. I talk myself dry and dumb, but I got her to use this field. That's Miss Yvonne Maurice.
Mike might have just have struck Bobby across the face. Her blue eyes widened and then thinned. Her small mouth trembled. She thrust her hands into her leather jacket and stopped where she was. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. A motion picture public thought her beautiful and gracious, graceful, lovely, sweet, witty, and brilliant. The public did not have to live with Yvonne Maurice, née Aggie Olson of Weymouth Falls, Iowa. She was costumed in pure black breeches and jacket trimmed with ermine, and her helmet was made of the heaviest parachute silk. Her goggles, rim, and band matched her dainty boots, and all these, of course, were highly unnecessary in a tightly closed cabin, but anyone, when pressed, would admit it was wonderful to behold. From the other side of the gleaming monster came Hugh Conroy. He was unimpressively clothed in flannel slacks and a white shirt and tennis shoes. His eyes were black. His face was lean and tanned by wind and sun above the clouds. Good-natured and open-hearted were the comments by which the press damned him. He would battle through storm and blackness, over chilly ranges and bleak, arid plains to new flying victories with his dashing way, and then he would land to the pop of flashlight bulbs and squirm and shuffle his feet and grin in a foolish way as though the press and public had caught him stealing jam. Mike's pupil and the idol of Bobby's eye, Hugh Conroy had never found out that he was famous, and he still worked for Mike's approval. Hugh knew that Yvonne Maurice and Bobby had never met, so he made the error of introducing them. Yvonne, heroine of 30 pictures, looked cunningly down her nose and laughed musically.
Bobby Stewart working on airplanes is so dirty. Isn't it, my dear?
The planes are all right. It's the people.
Are you learning to fly?
Yes, you should try it sometime. That's a nice ship, Hugh. Does it fly hands off?
Hands off, said Hugh, wondering why such a foolish question should come from a girl practically born in a hangar.
Why, of course, Bobby.
I thought so.
Said Bobby, taking Mike's arm and leading him away. Over her shoulder, with another smile, Bobby said,
Come on in the house when you're ready, Hugh. I've got some Devil's Grit soap I'll lend you. It takes off grease, and I suppose it even works on kiss-proof lipstick.
Hugh rubbed guiltily at his mouth with the back of his hand and shifted his feet uncomfortably.
You mustn't mind Bobby, my dear. Well, we're sort of raised together, and well, we always kid with each other, and she's a good kid and a swell flyer.
Indeed. And cooks too, I suppose. Makes someone a remarkable wife. Rather pretty too, in a way. I thought I never cared a great deal about the doll-faced type, but yes, she's pretty, undoubtedly, and witty too. Doubtless, even if a little crude. With some nice clothes, she would possibly be very attracted to some men.
Well, I'm glad you like her. She's a peach. She might keep this airport going somehow. I mean, though there's plenty of fields around here, Mike, well, he was very famous in his day. And,
yes, you told me.
Well, of course. He's a swell guy, and Bobby's got just as much nerve as he has, too.
Undoubtedly.
You bet. She can take a crate like that, the old GB, and just whip it
How
around.
interesting.
We used to scrap a lot. We still do. But it's just in fun. If I couldn't kid with Bobby once in a while, life wouldn't be worth a nickel.
No doubt. No doubt. You must see her often after we're married.
Oh, sure.
What a fine, generous boy you are.
cooed Yvonne, quoting words and action from her Broadway play, Her Night.
Famous and wonderful as you are, with all the world prostrate before you, you still cannot fail to recall the companions of your youth and help them with your protecting hand. And generously, such generosity is not to be expected from one grown so great. Would you take me home? The girl can put away the plane.
A month later, it became increasingly plain to Bobby that she would lose, or had lost, a race of quite another type. Hugh Conroy left to break his own transcontinental record. As research advisor into speed for Amalgamated Airlines and as technical advisor to the Banning Aircraft Corporation, it was necessary for him to try out a recently developed stratosphere motor which loved thin air. His departure was touching. He boosted himself out of his car, saw Bobby sitting on the operations office steps, and yelled the substance of his news, adding,
Wish me luck!
He came no closer than that. He tramped through the dust toward the hangar. But before he arrived, Yvonne Maurice swirled onto the field and blocked his way with her Mercedes. It was very, very touching. Striking, but a sad but dramatic pose, Yvonne told him that he was an eagle, never to be tamed, and that she would await his return with anxiety. Hugh Conroy, being pliable under the scorch of Yvonne's sad eyes, vowed vows which would have made King Arthur's knights sound like primary books. It all lasted for some time, and then they disappeared into the darkness of the hangar. Bobby had felt blue enough without that. She cupped her small chin in her brown hands and mistily regarded the far horizon. She could feel no bitterness toward Hugh. The man was being treated to a higher education in the art of love. She had crashed her airplane, you see, a long time ago, and Hugh had pulled her out just before the fabric had begun to crackle and roar. Hugh had been scared, and he had kept pleading with her to open her eyes. And when she had, he had teased her afterwards. She had accused him of trying to be heroic, and they laughed about it. They both knew then that something deeper than friendship was between them. And now he had forgotten, and Bobby listened to the starting whine of his bullet-like ship. She did not trust herself to look at him or the ship, and presently he was gone. After a little, she heard Yvonne's car start and drive away. Bobby angrily dabbed at her eyes, stood up, and told an empty gas can that she didn't care.
I don't care.
She went down to the hangar to see if she could find something absorbing to do. Somehow, it suited her to yank around the woman's all-metal monster plane. She brushed up the upholstery, pummeling it and kicking it to get the dust out, of course, and so vigorously that the big ship quivered. She had been engaged at this task for some time when she heard voices approaching the hangar. Yvonne Maurice and a man she had never seen before entered. The man was a whining, shallow-faced fellow with an exaggerated cut to his clothes and an exaggerated attempt to appear wise and worldly. Yvonne, though dressed beautifully in a tight-fitting fur coat, seemed to have shed something which might have been called a veneer or perhaps aristocracy. Outwardly, she was Yvonne Maurice. Inwardly, she had become, once again, Aggie Olson of Weymouth Falls, Iowa.
What the hell do I pay you for? I want you to produce. You get that? Produce. I can hire press agents for a nickel a dozen. If you can't get me results, whose fault is that, okay? Whose fault was it that my last one grossed less than $3 million? Yours. Whose fault was it that they talk about me slipping? Yours.
Look here, Yvonne, I ain't Moses. What you want is a miracle, see, and they're out of style. I'm doing the best I can. If you haven't had a front page in a month, well, that ain't my fault. Who thought up this idea about Conroy? Me, that's who.
You're trying to tell me I'm not paying up, are you? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Listen, I got that guy eating out of my hand. He's on his hands and knees begging for animal crackers. But I'm beginning to guess it won't mean headlines when we take the walk. Marriages are getting rotten write-ups lately, aren't they?
Oh, but I tell you, it's different. Say, you're not tired of the guy, are you?
Me? I should say not. Publicity or no publicity, that part of it goes through. But I'm telling you, Fritz, once and for all, you've got to earn your butter and cake if you expect me to keep handing it out. You've got to push this idea for all it's worth.
Well, I got it in the columns already.
I want it on the front page. You get that? I want it on the front page.
All right. I'll see what can be done. I'll wind up the old think tank and give it all I got. We'll use this cloud hopper to the limit.
See what you can do.
Threatened Yvonne, walking forward toward the ship. And Bobby was left amazed by the hard-boiled mercenary altitude and attitude of the woman. She knew better than to be caught in possession of those facts. Bobby slid the opposite door open and she slipped out. Yvonne was yowling for Mike to get her plane out.
Get my plane out now!
Bobby stayed in cover and let Mike do the work. Bobby's small mouth was curled with contempt, but she kept her peace and bided her time. She expected Hugh to return within the week, but the newspapers told her that Hugh Conroy had broken his own transcontinental record in spite of hurricane-velocity blizzard, and because of the undue stress on both plane and man, Conroy would remain for some time in New York. Bobby tried to fill her time with work. She kept Mike happy about the free treatment and fed him royally with baked beans, and she met the taxes on the airport and sighed over the 33 cents which remained in the strongbox. But she could not keep from plotting the downfall of Yvonne Maurice. She let locomotives run her over and happily listened to her shrieks. She found Yvonne's 3 undivorced husbands and sent Yvonne to a dismal dungeon. She caught Yvonne stealing the proceeds of a benefit and hauled her into court. She fed Yvonne to a man-eating tiger. And although this was a pleasant pastime, Yvonne continued in hatefully good health, and neither husbands nor tigers eventually materialized. The more Bobby thought along these lines, the more secure she became in the belief that if she could show Hugh that Yvonne had a yellow streak as wide as the Colorado down her graceful spine, Hugh's interest would cool. Bobby laid careful plans. She would badger this Yvonne into showing herself up, and then she, Bobby, would step out and cover herself with glory. At noon one windy day, Yvonne Maurice, the fellow called Fritz, and a coarse-featured man dressed as Mr. Hellig drove up before the operations office. Imperiously, Yvonne ordered,
"Run out my plane."
Bobby, needing the rent, and the plane gave more than she needed to fight on the spot, collected Mike, and soon had the big metal ship on the line ticking over. Yvonne was wearing a fur-lined, beautifully tailored suit and looked very adventurous. She nervously kept fiddling with her helmet and twisting at it as she held her hands. Afterward, there arrived a delivery truck out of which came a dozen mysteriously wrapped packages. These had no more than been stowed in the ship when a small car skidded to a halt and disgorged a man who carried a black grip and wore glasses. A minute or so later, all the traffic on the highway roared into the field and belched up men with pads of paper and pencils and men with microphones and men with cameras. Bobby retreated to the operations office, but she could not enter because Yvonne Maurice was standing heroically upon the steps, posing and saying things she read off a paper and smiling fixedly. Questions which Bobby could not grasp were rocketing through the air, and Fritz was answering them and passing out cigars, just past Mr. Hellig. Presently, Yvonne went inside the office to let the 3 men clear the runway, and Bobby, suspecting the worst, followed. And then Mr. Hellig entered. He was gnawing on a black cigar, and he was sitting on a desk, and she found Yvonne nervous and angry. She found Fritz pleading and whining.
Just like you. Your idea of good publicity is to let somebody get killed. A lot of good that headline is gonna do for me. You've talked me into it, but it's not going through.
But the weather's swell.
You better be sure I got my investment here.
Of course I'm sure. Look, I sidetracked the news. I used all my influence. I barked down the army, and I convinced the doc yours is the only plane that can get there. And now you won't go through with it? Look, it's a chance of a lifetime. Front page. And what will this do for you and Conroy? Well, it makes the romance news. It's beautiful. Oh, you can't back out.
The hell I can't back out. I'm backing out. We'll see about this weather. When Mr. Press Agent, we'll see about this weather.
I got my investment.
What's the weather north over the mountains?
Bobby turned the weather map around on the desk.
It all depends on where you're going.
Smithville? Ugh, that's where you want me to go, Smithville. There it is, straight north, 250 miles. Wind and snow indeed. You lied, Fritz.
Honest, I didn't. Honest, I thought it was good weather. I got all this laid out, and what a story. Hey, don't throw me down. It'll make front page, I tell you. Every newspaper in the world will yell, "Actress risks life to save miners."
What do I care about a pack of filthy miners? What will it do me any good if I crack up in the Sierras?
I've got my investment to think of. I got a pitcher, half shot, and I lose maybe what? 3, 4 million if you get killed. No, Fritzy, you have too far already gone. You make me look like a fool, but I've got my investment.
Oh, I'm ruined. They'll never listen to me again. God, it's awful.
Mr. Hellig puffed thoughtfully, gnawed at the frayed black tobacco, and then spat the fragments with the air of a man to whom all things are simple and solvable.
I get doubles for Miss Maurice in her pictures, don't I?
Yeah.
Well, Barney, I'll call up. He ain't so big. We put the mask on him and shoo him in.
They'll see him coming in here. Besides, he's too big for the part.
Fritz fixed his bright eyes on
Say.
Bobby. It was the first time he had looked at her, and he had been too worried to think of anyone but himself.
You, ain't you that dame that flies these races? Look here, I seen your picture someplace.
She flies? A double just like I said. See here, what's your name? You want to earn maybe 500 smackers, huh?
Bobby looked coolly from the tip of his pointed shoes to the crown of his expensive hat. She shoved her hands into her pockets, about-faced, and started walking toward the door.
Wait!
See here, you. This ain't no job, hardly at all. You make $500 just like that.
Bobby looked at the three with disgust.
If you expect me to be a cheap...
$1,000. We make it, huh? $1,000.
More than angry, hurt by their lack of sense, Bobby tried to tell them how rotten she thought they were, but she did not get very far. She could look between Fritz and Yvonne and see out in the field beyond the operations office. Into the range of the window view hobbled Mike. He was on his way down to the hangar, and he was leaning more heavily than usual on his cane. He stopped, looked sadly at the shining ship on the line, and then, with inclined head, went on. Bobby choked on what she had to say. Her words were,
The price is $5,000, gentlemen. Goodbye.
But,
Mr. Hellig tried to bargain, but to no avail. Yvonne, only too glad to give up the suit and helmet, even went so far as to help Bobby get into them. Then, with Mr. Hellig's check to Dr. H.R. Randolph, secure in a sealed and addressed envelope bound eastward to the clinic, Bobby was ready to go. She stuffed the weather map into her pocket, and she placed her hand on the doorknob.
Oh, keep a running string of talk coming out of the radio, see? You can't recognize a voice on the shortwave anyhow. And if you crack up, well, let us know when it starts happening, see? And then we can shove Miss Maurice into a car.
That's a good idea.
And let her limp away and
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And stay a town nearby or something.
Yeah, well, more publicity. Ever if you crack up, remember, let us know. Hey, we better get out of here through that exit over there.
Yeah.
Masked and goggled, Bobby walked through the grinding and clicking gamut of the news cameras and off to the plane. A blustery, professional-looking man crossed to the plane and took his seat, glancing anxiously at the big gold watch and plucking at his glasses.
I'm Dr. Preston, Miss Maurice. It's mighty fine of you to help us out this way. There are only 46 men suffering from burns up there at Smallville, and if me and the medicine fail to arrive, it'll be the end of them. Explosion, that is. Splendid of you, Miss Maurice. I can say I didn't think an actress would do such a thing. That is, it's most unusual.
The shining metal ship charged down the runway and bored skyward. It headed around to the north and began to climb, and with a flash of sun on wings, was gone. Above the tortuous breadth of the high Sierra, storm clouds were assembling. Lightning was stabbing through the clouds somewhere near at hand. The fog glared and went out in intermittent flares. The doctor was not at all perturbed. He watched his timepiece more than the white mist all about them. He did not even blink when Bobby pulled up with a peak almost tangling in the strut. The ship climbed high and roared north again.
It's 3 o'clock. How much longer will it take?
Bobby shook her head, and the doctor impatiently shrugged. Into her radiophone, she said,
Give me a bearing, please.
Los Angeles picked her up. So did Denver. Presently, with the headphones roaring and crackling as the lightning flashed, a toneless voice came back.
fly 301 degrees. Smithfield, 26 miles.
Bobby looked at her map and corrected her course. She had been almost on top of the weather, but now she had to come back down into the clouds. She hoped her dials were right. She hoped no peaks had shifted around that day. A moment later, she said,
We're over it.
Good.
The ship dropped through the white atmosphere. Snow began to pile up on the shield before Bobby's face. She came as low as she dared, but she still could not see. Oh, how dark it was down here in the shadows of the world. She came lower and managed to make out a red-bounded square. Feeling better, she cut the guns and came whistling down to the bumpy, jarring earth. Men with their arms loaded with railroad flares were instantly surrounding them. Two of them bounded hurriedly into the cabin, saw the packages, dropped their burdens, and assumed others. The doctor was hustled away. A big bearded fellow stopped briefly beside Bobby.
Oh, gee, this is swell of you, Miss Maurice. I like your pictures a lot. You know, you saved the bacon for 46 of the boys. They got caught coming off shift when the powder magazine went bluey. Oh, gee, Miss Maurice, it's gosh, I think it's swell. Thanks.
Another pleaded with her to get out and have some coffee.
Stay and have another cup of coffee.
3 or 4 kindly wives added their invitations. Bobby knew she could not run the risk of exposing Yvonne Maurice. She refused and had them help her turn the plane around. She roared down the snow-crusted field over the boundary of still spluttering fares and skyward. She built her altitude over the range of mighty mountains and set her course.
Fog over coastal plain. Snow falling above 4,000. Wind velocity 80 miles from southwest. Visibility over range 0.
Okay.
Okay.
It was light again at 12,000 feet, but not for long. The sun was beginning to sink, and the feeble rays could not travel far horizontally through the murk. Bobby looked at her gas gauges. The needles were flickering from empty to 1/4. She looked fixedly at them. It was the first time she had flown this plane, and she had not learned the tricks of the dials. Evidently, the gauges read both 1/4 and 0 when the gas was very low, but which was it? She had strayed from her course on the trip in. That had taken gas. She had built altitude 4 different times. She was fighting a wind which cut her cruising speed exactly in half. Calmly, with a lightning's rasp punctuating her words, she said,
What's my position, please?
A few minutes later, Denver cut in.
18 miles to the west of your course. Fly 194 degrees. Los Angeles, 206 miles.
Bobby made the shift. Something was wrong with this weather. She should have been farther along than that. The airspeed indicator was reading 165 miles an hour, and her ground speed should have been at 80 at least.
Weather. Miss Maurice calling LA weather?
Okay. 80 miles southwest wind.
And something was wrong. Los Angeles didn't know.
Only a few minutes more gas. Still over Sierras. Wind speed must be wrong.
The operator got excited, on the other hand. He was sitting in a safe office, and as Bobby was the one that was 10,000 feet aloft in a storm and growing night. Bobby could not see 10 feet in front of the ship. The right engine was beginning to gasp and pop for want of fuel. The nose was getting heavy. The left engine wheezed and faltered.
Give me my position, please.
On course over Kauai Peaks. 100 and...
Plot it and mark it. Both engines dead. I'm going down.
She cut the switches. She tightened her mask, turned off the gas lines, tightened her belt, turned on her landing lights, and removed the phone from her mouth. The singing wires were all the sound now with the engines gone. It was lonely and dark. She could not see through the blanket of white under her. Trees, peaks, ridges, rocks. Hugh would feel bad. Maybe he had heard the last call to Los Angeles, but then he would think. She had helped the miners anyhow. 46 was a good number of lives to save at the price of one. And Mike was okay now. He'd go east and wonder why she'd ever pulled such a stunt, but he'd get over it. With an easy hand, she kept the ship on course. The wings sighed through the blackness. A treetop. Branches. She hit. stunned. She tried to sit up. She dazedly fumbled for the buckle of her safety belt. Her bleeding fingers fumbled with the battered catch of the door. It swung open, and she dropped 2 feet into drifts of freezing snow. Oh, it revived her. She tried to stand, and the world was smashed out with a red explosion of agony. Maybe help would come, though this was far from the traveled highways and byroads. She crawled in under the cabin, which lay upon its side, and searched. She kept touching cylinders, which rolled, and she realized that they were the flares which the miner had dropped. There seemed to be dozens of them. She withdrew from the ship to a safe distance and lighted a flare. The red glow lit up the white earth for more than 200 yards. She dragged out cushions and laid them on the snow, unable to move much more. Becoming aware of 100 bruises and cuts, she adjusted her goggles to keep the snow away from her eyes and laid herself down. Each time it got dark, she would make herself wake up and start another flare going. She had no hope of immediate rescue. Flare after flare, hour after hour, the wind moaned through the wreckage and plucked at her sleeve. Once she thought she heard a motor. She could not tell. No plane could land here. The wind plucked at her sleeve and turned her over on her back. She stared up at a goggled giant who crouched beside her. It was Hugh. He spoke reassuringly and stood to rid himself of what remained of his parachute harness. He was covered with snow and his clothing was torn and his cheek was bleeding. He reached down and took her in his arms and started down the mountainside. Bobby was too weak and chilled to say a word. She knew what Hugh had thought, that she was still Yvonne Maurice to Hugh. Oh, when he found out. They traveled hours through the night, and then Hugh saw a glowing yellow rectangle, a trapper's cabin, which had already been spotted from the air. Bobby didn't hear them entrance, but presently she heard men's voices near at hand and felt the warmth of a fire. A strange voice said it was going for a doctor, and then a door banged. She could hear Hugh's boots as he moved up and down before the fire. She felt her face. Yes, the goggles were still there. Then he did not know. When he found out, would he be angry? What would he think? He was beside her now, looking down at her. His face was very worried.
I'm sorry that they let you do it, but I know why you did, and I love you for it. Bobby, can you ever find it in your heart?
She tried to sit up. So great was her surprise. She worked the mask from her face.
But how did you know?
Hugh took her hand, and he smiled.
How did I know? I was in Salt Lake City, coming back west, and I was told what you said.
But
that wasn't Yvonne, Bobby. You took it so calmly. You knew what to do, and...
But I can't let anyone else know. They'd stop the payment on the check, and Mike.
There's no need to worry about that. All right, Bobby? The world already knows. Mike phoned me when you were gone, and Mike saw Yvonne leave the field, and by now the presses are running and reeling off the story. She wanted publicity, and she's gonna get it. Though not the same kind. Forget her. Bobby, if you, well, I'd like to ask you, when you get well.
Bobby pulled his tousled head down toward her.
Yes.